When you think about winning a war, you probably picture some new superweapon or a massive invasion, right? But what if I told you that the most decisive victory in the air war over Europe, the one that really made D-Day possible, wasn't won with a bomb, but with an idea? A terrifyingly simple, counterintuitive idea, symbolized by one man ordering one sign to be torn off a wall. Today, we're not just looking at a moment in history. We're actually digging into the blueprint of a revolution, one that, to the men ordered to carry it out, seemed like a death sentence, but would ultimately break the back of the entire German war machine. So let's start with the crisis that made it all necessary. Okay, to really get what a huge deal this was, we have to go back to the darkest days of the air war. It's late 1943. For the American bomber crews of the 8th Air Force over in England, the mission sounds simple enough. Fly deep into the heart of Germany and wreck its industry. But the skies over the Third Reich, they had become a slaughterhouse. These crews were flying into a high-tech, deeply entrenched air defense system, and they were, to put it bluntly, being systematically annihilated. These aren't just words on a screen. This is a cry of absolute despair from a guy who survived the unimaginable. Lieutenant Robert Morgan, he was the pilot of the Memphis Belle, a bomber that became famous for one reason. It was one of the very first to actually survive its 25-mission tour of duty. Think about that for a second. Surviving was the exception, not the rule. And after one particularly brutal raid, this is what he wrote in his private diary. Not for a newspaper, not for propaganda, for himself. "We are being slaughtered. We fly on alone into hell." And you know what? The data proves he wasn't exaggerating one bit. I mean, just look at these numbers. They're brutal. This is from a single mission that became known as Black Thursday. 291 B-17s were sent to bomb ball bearing factories. 60 of them never came back. And that's not just 60 airplanes, that is 600 men. 600 sons, brothers, husbands, killed or captured in one afternoon. It's like wiping a small town off the map in a few hours. At this point in the war, the odds of a 10-man crew actually finishing their tour was as low as 25%. This wasn't warfare. It was a horrifyingly inefficient meat grinder, just chewing up America's best and brightest. And the heart of the problem was brutally simple: fuel. The American escort fighters, like the tough P-47 Thunderbolt, were great planes, but they had short legs. They could only fly so far before their fuel tanks ran dry, and they had to turn back. The bomber crews had a name for this point of no return. They called it the corner. And they'd watch with dread as their little friends waggled their wings and peeled off for home, leaving them to fly on alone into the heart of Germany. And the German commanders, they weren't stupid. They knew exactly where this would happen. They'd just wait patiently just beyond the fighter's range, and then they would pounce. So the losses got so bad that the entire American strategy of daylight bombing was on the verge of total collapse. I mean, the whole reason the 8th Air Force was even there was about to be proven a failure. Something had to change, or the air war was lost. Period. The solution came in two forms. One was a new piece of tech, the amazing P-51 Mustang with its incredible range. And the other was human, a new commander named Major General Jimmy Doolittle. So on January 6, 1944, his very first day in command, Doolittle walks into his fighter headquarters, and on the wall is a sign that basically sums up the entire defensive philosophy of the air war up to that point. It read, "The first duty of 8th Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." Doolittle looks at it, and with no big speech, no ceremony, he just orders it taken down. In its place, a new directive went up, his new philosophy. And that simple act, it signaled a massive, revolutionary shift in strategy. The mission was no longer about survival, it was about pure destruction. Now, to really get this radical change, you have to understand the man behind it. Jimmy Doolittle was not some stuffy general from the Bomber Command fraternity. No, he was a fighter pilot, through and through. This was a man who lived his life pushing the limits. He'd been a champion air racer, a test pilot. He even had a doctorate in aeronautical engineering from MIT. This guy understood airplanes better than almost anyone alive. And of course, he was already a national hero for leading that insane 1942 raid on Tokyo. His entire career was built on taking calculated, aggressive risks. So he didn't see the problem as, how do we save more bombers? He saw it as, how do we kill more German fighters? This radical change in thinking was immediately turned into a radical change in tactics. And for the guys in the cockpits, well, the reaction was split right down the middle. For the fighter pilots, it was like a dream come true. For the bomber crews, it was their worst nightmare come to life. So here's how things were done before Doolittle showed up. The fighters were basically chained to the bombers. They flew in what was called close escort, staying right there with their charges, like sheepdogs guarding a flock. If German fighters attacked, their job was just to break up the attack and then get right back to the bomber stream. The huge flaw here is that it's totally reactive. The Americans were letting the Germans call all the shots every single time. Doolittle's order cut the leash. He told his fighter pilots to stop being bodyguards and start being hunters. He unleashed them. They were now ordered to fly 50, even 75 miles ahead of the bombers to find the German fighters while they were still getting organized and hit them before they could ever become a threat. And then, get this, after the bombers dropped their loads and turned for home, the fighters were ordered to stay, drop down to treetop level, and, in his words, strafe the hell out of Germany. Hitting airfields, trains, anything that moved. They were taking the war to the enemy's front door. The fighter pilots who'd been so frustrated by being on the defensive were absolutely euphoric. Finally, they were being allowed to do what they were trained to do: hunt. Colonel Don Blakesley, a total legend, gathered his men and gave them the new mission in these exact words. It just perfectly captures that mental shift from protector to predator. They were being set free. Okay, now, let's flip the script. Imagine you're not in a nimble little fighter. You're a 20-year-old kid in the belly of a B-17. It's 30 below zero, you're breathing through an oxygen mask. You can't see the grand strategy on some general's map. All you know is that those tiny dots in the sky, your fighter escort, are the only things between you and a horrifying death. And now you're being told that those fighters are going to intentionally fly away from you over the horizon to go look for a fight, leaving you completely exposed. The bomber crews were absolutely, utterly terrified. They saw it as a betrayal, a death sentence signed by a crazy general. Seriously, put yourself in their boots for a second. You are the bait. The success of this whole grand strategy depends on you flying straight and level, attracting the enemy like moths to a flame, while your protectors are miles away. Would you trust that plan? Or would you be counting every single second, convinced that this was your last flight? Doolittle was gambling with thousands of lives, betting that the best way to guard the flock was to go out and kill all the wolves. Well, Doolittle's big gamble didn't stay a theory for long. Just 1 month after he took command, in the last week of February 1944, the Allies launched a massive, coordinated series of raids. The official codename was Operation Argument, but history would remember it by its more famous name, Big Week. The strategy behind Big Week was a masterstroke of brutal logic. The Allies sent more than 1,000 heavy bombers every day to attack the one target the German High Command could not afford to ignore: its own aircraft factories. This meant the Luftwaffe had to come up and fight, no matter what it cost them. And that was the whole point. The factories weren't the real target. The German Air Force itself was. The bombers were the bait, and Doolittle's newly unleashed fighters were the steel jaws of the trap. The results of Big Week, they were staggering. Now, the American losses were serious: 226 bombers, 28 fighters, and about 2,600 men. But America's industrial power could replace the planes, and its massive training programs could, tragically, replace the men. But now look at the German side. Over 350 fighters lost. But the truly fatal blow is that second number. About 150 of their best, most experienced fighter pilots, their aces, their leaders, killed or badly wounded. For the Luftwaffe, losing that many veterans in 1 week was like a pro sports team losing its entire starting lineup and coaching staff in one game. You can't just train a new ace. That experience was gone forever. And if you want to know what it felt like from the other side, listen to this. It's from the diary of a German ace, Major Heinz Baer. He's admitting that even when they win, even when they shoot down a bomber, they are paying an impossible price for it. The American fighters were everywhere. They were ambushing them, diving on them from the sun, hitting them on their own airfields. The hunter had officially become the hunted. It was a rate of loss they simply could not sustain. Doolittle's gamble was paying off big time. Big Week wasn't the end of the Luftwaffe, but it was absolutely the beginning of the end. It broke their back. In the months that followed, from March to May of 1944, Doolittle's wolves would systematically hunt down and destroy what was left of German air power. And they did it to make sure that when the Allies finally hit the beaches in Normandy, the sky above them would be theirs and theirs alone. This table right here shows the incredible reversal of fortune, and the numbers are just stark. Back in October 43, during Black Thursday, the situation was a catastrophe. But by May of 44, after just 4 months of Doolittle's offensive strategy, American fighters were destroying 4 German fighters for every single one they lost. It was one of the most complete and rapid turnarounds in the entire history of warfare. And here it is, the ultimate payoff. This is what it was all for. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Allies flew more than 14,000 sorties over the invasion beaches. And the once mighty Luftwaffe, which had dominated Europe for years, they could barely manage to put 300 planes in the air to respond. The soldiers storming those beaches could look up and see a sky that was packed, wall to wall with friendly aircraft. The threat from above was gone. Air supremacy was total. And you don't have to take my word for how critical this all was. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander himself, said it plain as day. He said that air power gave the invasion force the one thing that was essential for its success. Not just helpful, not just important, essential. Without the victory that Doolittle's fighters won in those bloody months, the D-Day landings could have been a complete and catastrophic failure. So, out of all that fire and chaos, a new, fundamental truth of warfare was forged, and it remains the bedrock of military air power doctrine to this very day. You don't get control of the air by passively defending your stuff. You achieve it by aggressively seeking out and destroying the enemy's ability to even fight back. It's a principle taught at every military academy on the planet, and it was written in the skies over Germany in 1944. You know, the story of the Doolittle Revolution leaves us with this timeless question that goes way beyond the battlefield. In the end, the bomber crews were saved, not because their protectors huddled closer, but because they were unleashed to eliminate the threat at its source. It makes you ask, in business, in your career, in any competitive situation, when does playing defense stop being safe and start becoming a losing strategy? And when is the surest path to victory not just a good offense, but a truly relentless one?